Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. What a busy show we have for you. You're going to love this coming up in a few minutes. We have laughed at some ridiculous hot takes already this offseason. Apparently, one of the providers of one of those ridiculous hot takes may be slightly aware of how ridiculous his previous take was. We're going to give you an about face on that. And for those of you who just sort of live in the college football world all the time, you will think this is funny. We'll give you that. Lots of recruiting news in the show today. It's been a busy week after all for Georgia recruiting. We're going to cover all of that with you here today. We have some interesting intel on one of Georgia's arguably most important game. We'll give that to you here. And off the top, what we think is a fairly simple point about Gunner Stockton, which we believe could be true, backed up by the words of a former UGA great. Seems like a great place to be here on a Friday. We'll close out your week strong, get you ready for a great Father's Day weekend. We are thankful to have you with us for it as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
To all the dads out there, hope you're getting ready for a great Father's Day weekend. To everybody else, hope you're getting ready to take good care of your dad. We love this time of the year. I'm looking forward to kind of a low-key Father's Day weekend. Maybe watch a little golf, hang out, relax. Don't need anything too fancy. Just spending time with my family will certainly be plenty enough, and I know many of you sort of feel the same way. Speaking of time, we're also going to try to make good use of your time on the program here today. And what we want to do is make, I think, kind of a simple point, which is you have seen some chatter around what we presume is going to be, and certainly will be, Georgia's starting quarterback, Gunner Stockton, for the upcoming season. That Stockton, because he didn't have the highest recruiting profile, coming out of high school. He's, a highly ranked recruit, kind of right there around a top 100 recruit. Actually, people forget this. He is far higher rated as a recruit than Carson Beck was. I think it's one of those things that just sort of gets lost in the sauce a little bit, but it is no doubt true, and it's got nothing to do with what we're talking about right now, but just one of those things that people seem to forget. But the point is, Stockton was like sort of a top 100 level recruit, but not a 5-star, not someone as famous as like, say, Arch Manning or some of the other quarterbacks we've talked about in recent years. So lower profile as a recruit, been around Georgia for a couple of years, but pretty limited in his experience. Now, played a big second half against Texas in the SEC championship, got a chance to start the Sugar Bowl against Notre Dame. We thought 6 quarters against playoff level teams that Stockton did his job, got the job done. We tried not to get too caught up in the hype post SEC championship, and we tried not to get too caught up in the I guess the attempt to sort of tear him down after the loss against Notre Dame. We tried to sort of keep it in the middle on that. I think we successfully did that around here. But what you have is overall a quarterback who hasn't played very much, who wasn't as famous as some of his contemporaries. And so therefore, when you look at preseason magazines, online content, social media chatter, what you see when everybody kind of ranks their best quarterbacks for the upcoming season, Gunner Stockton is really not found on those lists. He is not thought to be one of the 10 best quarterbacks for the 2025 season by almost any media entity or media outlet that might do that. And so we would say, because it is not quite, you can't say with certainty how he's going to play. So some sort of questioning or some level of skepticism to a degree is probably fair. And for some Georgia fans, that gets concerning. If you don't have a known commodity that you can guarantee success for, I think some Georgia fans kind of wonder, well, what if he's not very good? There'll also be sort of nefarious actors in the media that will sometimes try to take that concern and sort of package it as a level of panic and then sell it back to these same fans. That kind of goes on sometimes too. We reject that whole cloth. But nonetheless, it does sort of exist. Either way, though, there is, I think, understandably, a little bit of concern, a little bit of questioning of, are we sure for a Georgia team that has championship aspirations, are we sure they're going to be okay kind of trusting a quarterback that has as little experience as Gunner Stockton has, even if the experience he did gain in the postseason a year ago was mostly successful, at least in terms of his personal contribution? Are we sure Georgia's okay with that? I would say that's a fair question. Now, I would also say that as that question gets asked, the chances of Gunner providing a really affirmative answer to all of that and really demonstrating that he's actually far better than people realize, those who don't know him at all or those who know him and have expressed some skepticism, the bar to cross, the line to gain for Stockton to prove himself to be far better than his critics have suggested he might be is actually not all that difficult to do for a couple of reasons. The main reason I want to focus on here for a moment is the Georgia schedule itself. Now, listen, the Georgia schedule overall is really difficult. We would say that. But when you look at the role that Stockton's going to play this season at the quarterback position in particular, we would say that that's where things kind of get interesting a little bit. And thank you to Kaylee, who's producing today, for putting this on the screen. Well, let's look at it for a moment. And let's just kind of focus on the month of September here just for a second. Marshall's the first game of the year. That's August 30th. Then September 6th, you take on Austin Peay. Normally, these are the kinds of games that some Georgia fans, even at the beginning of the season, might have a tendency to sort of disregard a little bit. We think, though, this particular season, games like Marshall and Austin Peay are actually really interesting for Georgia because, a year ago, Georgia was plagued by slow starts offensively. And if you'll remember, that actually wasn't just a one-year story for Georgia. Go back to 2023 when they were also kind of beginning the year playing some lesser opponents such as Ball State and the like. Georgia kind of also got off to slow starts in those games too, even SEC games in 2023. South Carolina, Auburn, these were games in which Georgia was a big favorite, but the games themselves were actually closer than experts thought they were going to be. And some of that was because Georgia got off to just such a slow start that day that they had to kind of work their way back to even give themselves a chance to win. So we believe in 2025, Georgia's going to try to fix some of that offensively and be better than it's been offensively. And games such as Marshall and Austin Peay, typically the kind of game you might just sort of sim to the end and fast forward pass. Well, this year you probably don't want to do that quite as much. You want to see, hey, can Georgia get off to faster starts? Can it put up bigger numbers against lesser competition? Can it kind of show itself to be a competent and capable offense for what's going to come after that? So we're actually going to be watching Marshall and Austin Peay far closer this year than we sometimes would, games like that, because these two games end up being the tune-up for what comes next. And the two giant games in September for Georgia, at Tennessee on September 13th, off week after that, then it's hosting Alabama on September 27th. And believe you me, these two games will be showcase opportunities for Gunner Stockton and sort of a moment in which Mike Bobo, the offensive coordinator, Kirby Smart, the head coach, they're going to have their feet held to the fire about, are you really sure you made the right decision trusting a starting quarterback who'd played so little? You didn't go to the transfer portal. You didn't try to bring in somebody else. You said our guy here, who's only played a little bit, can be our full season starting quarterback. Are you ready to throw him to the wolves and 100,000+ fans against Tennessee? Are you ready to put him against an Alabama program that you've had challenges and struggles with, no matter who the Georgia quarterback's been? Are you really ready to do that? And once again, to a certain extent, we would say that feels like a little bit of a fair question. Obviously, Georgia is sort of a national championship or bust type team. It has championship expectations and anticipation of that kind of success almost every year. So asking Gunner to be a championship level quarterback is one of the things that Georgia's just going to do. But let me consider for a moment something that perhaps hasn't been considered enough. Is it really that hard to be the best quarterback on the road at Tennessee on that particular Saturday? I mean, let's face it. This is a Tennessee team that has had a really challenging offseason. You know this because you follow the headlines. Nico Iamaleava, the former Tennessee quarterback, left. Big NIL squabble. Wanted more money, we're led to believe, bolted for what he thought greener pastures at UCLA. the quarterback that was at UCLA, who had been at Appalachian State. He now takes the roster spot left over by Emil Oleva at Tennessee. But we don't know if it's going to be him or one of the other two quarterbacks that's been on the Vols roster as the actual starter here this year. This is a Tennessee team that's going to begin the year in the preseason top 25, but they got some fairly decent turmoil at the quarterback position. In other words, we don't know if Gunner's going to be one of the best in America, and we do believe that it's fair not to rank him among the preseason best right now, whether you're ranking SEC quarterbacks or quarterbacks nationally, because Gunner's proven so little. But once again, is it that hard to be the better quarterback with whoever Tennessee trots out on that particular Saturday? I would say that's potentially kind of a fairly low bar to cross. And then the same thing's true 2 weeks later against Alabama. We're actually going to talk more about this later on in the show. It certainly seems like right now that Alabama is kind of circling Ty Simpson as its starting quarterback. And if the big knock on Gunner Stockton for Georgia is, well, he's played so little, so how can we be certain? If that's the big knock on Gunner, the guy who may start for Alabama next year only threw 25 passes a year ago. He only completed 14 of those, did not throw a touchdown, only averaged 6.7 yards per attempt. This is a guy who played very little, and the football he did play was undistinguished. That's the Alabama quarterback. So once again, and I do realize he'll have Ryan Williams, the former 17-year-old, at his disposal. But if you make this just a comparison between quarterbacks, is it that hard to imagine that much the same way that Gunner could outplay whoever starts at quarterback for Tennessee, all of a sudden Gunner Stockton 2 weeks later could also outplay whoever starts for Alabama, given that Gunner will be at home and the guy that Alabama's playing has essentially as little experience coming into the year that Gunner Stockton has? This was a question I posed to the great former Georgia wide receiver Terrence Edwards yesterday. My theory that Gunner's inexperience is cause for concern, but he'll also, in the big games that he plays early in the season, also likely be facing other quarterbacks that also suffer from a similar level of inexperience. This is what Terrence Edwards said about that in response to that question yesterday.
I think both programs, the Tennessee program and the Alabama program, are breaking in new quarterbacks as well. So we're not going into a Bryce Young at Alabama type situation or experienced quarterback like Joe Milton. And he wasn't the best at Tennessee, but he was an experienced quarterback. So we're going to go in there with the same, or Gunner's going to have even more game experience than those guys. So it's not foreseen that Gunner could go in there and be the better quarterback out of the two in those two games. I just think the supporting cast for Georgia is going to be a little better, especially against Tennessee. Tennessee is going to have really good receivers still. But I just think Georgia just had Tennessee's number, being able to stop that high-power offense. So Gunner just got to go in and just be Gunner. We've always watched Gunner in high school and know he's a winner. Like he is a quarterback that I would like to have on my team because he just understands football.
So once again, I think that's incredibly interesting from Terrence Edwards from two different perspectives. First of all, he mentions the idea of the supporting cast that Gunner's going to have around him. The other day, I was sitting around the pool, which is, I'm sure, not a pleasant sight for some of you to imagine me in a bathing suit, but nonetheless, I'm sitting around the pool. I'm reading one of my college football preseason magazines. It happened to be the Athlon preseason magazine, and they were looking at all the various position groups nationally. And they had their top 10 offensive line, top 10 quarterback, top 10 running backs, top 10 wide receivers, defense. You got top 10 defensive line, top 10 linebackers, top 10 secondary, top 10, everything. And I thought it was really interesting to see that, once again, Georgia did not show up as one of the top 10 quarterbacks for the upcoming season. They weren't there. But they did have top 10 wide receivers. They did have top 10 running backs. They were top 10 nationally in all three levels of the defense. That when you're making the evaluation of what Gunner is, it is actually sort of hard to just sort of isolate this as Stockton a variable in and unto himself. You do think about the team he has playing around him. And Terrence says, listen, I saw this guy be a winner in high school, believe he can be a winner in college, and it's that supporting cast around him that also gives that a chance to be true. We've been saying that now for months. But also, let's just kind of let our mind wander about this a little bit more. What if Gunner does outplay whoever the Tennessee starting quarterback ends up being. And then what if he also outplays Ty Simpson too? Not impossible things to happen given the fact that these are not distinguished quarterbacks on the other side. Can you imagine how quickly the perception of Gunner Stockton is going to change? All of a sudden he goes from being a little bit of an unknown to kind of something of a household name. A little bit like the kind of runaway hype that he dealt with after the SEC championship that we thought was to a degree unfair. Maybe some of this will also be unfair too, where people build him up only in the hope of getting a chance to maybe one day kind of tear him back down again. Sometimes that's the sort of thing that happens that is true. But it is interesting and fun to imagine how quickly perception can change once there are new data points to consider. We would say games against unestablished quarterbacks like Tennessee and Alabama could be pretty significant data points in how people think of Gunner Stockton and what Stockton puts on display in games like that the eyes of the college football world are going to be watching. And on yesterday's edition of DawgNation Daily, Terrence Edwards went into more details about when people do kind of watch and see Gunner, when they do kind of examine him more closely, in some cases perhaps for the first time, what Terrence believes they will see in him. This is from yesterday's show.
The biggest thing that I think Gunner's going to bring to this team is leadership, and leadership goes a long way. And that's what I'm looking for, how the team rally around him, good, bad, or indifference, how the team supports Gunner is my biggest takeaway of what I'm going to see from Gunner, because I believe the team is going to play to Gunner's, how Gunner plays, a hard, tough-nosed quarterback. I mean, he got hit in that Texas game, and man, I thought he was out, and he went back in. So that's the type of quarterback that we're going to get, hard, tough-nosed, blue-collar quarterback.
Hard, tough-nosed, blue-collar quarterback. Now, here's the thing. We've seen Georgia rally around that before, and this is not me saying Gunner Stockton and Stetson Bennett 2.0. I legitimately don't believe that's the case. I don't. I think they're two different guys. I think their playing profile is a little bit different. I think their personality profile is actually a good bit different. I don't see automatic similarities between Gunner and Stetson. I truly don't. I liked both guys for what they did for Georgia. Bennett, what we know he did. Gunner, what I believe he can do. But I don't believe I don't believe they embody the same thing. I think they're different on the field and in their personal life, if I had to guess. But I do think that aspect of this could be similar. That the Georgia team in 2021, when he first stepped in, rallied around Stetson Bennett because of a blue-collar mentality. And I do believe that what we've seen over the course of the last few months, prior to his first full season as a starting quarterback, is Georgia rally around Gunner Stockton too for that particular reason, because he does bring sort of a blue-collar, hard-working mindset. Now imagine, for that belief that already exists, if that belief is confirmed by evidence, if he does go out and outplay whoever starts in Knoxville for the Vols, and if he does come back home and outplay what we think might be Ty Simpson starting for Alabama, how much stronger does that bond get between Gunner, the so-called winner, the true leader that Terrence Edwards described, and everything else on this Georgia roster, which an Athlon Sports preseason magazine says maybe like top 10 across the board with all position groups? Doesn't that sort of feel like the kind of Georgia team that could do some special things here this season? Certainly sounds like it to me, and that's why this first month of this 2025 season, from the perspective of what Gunner Stockton does and the perspective of what the team does around him, this could be incredibly fun to watch. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. What a great privilege it is. Let me try to say that in English. What a great privilege it is to have them a part of the program, and you the same way. We're just glad you're here. In fact, as a way of making it easy for you to get here, we try to create lots of platform opportunities for you. All kinds of video platforms, whether you watch live or on demand, radio with our friends, Athens Sports Radio 960 Ref, podcasts, wherever you find them, including posting the show to the world-famous DawgNation.com or Apple, Spotify. A lot of folks listening on Spotify these days, which I really love. That's a super, I think, functional podcast platform. That's great. But whichever one works for you, we're just glad that it does, and we've tried to make it as accessible for you as we possibly can. And so grateful, as I said, for our folks at Kroger. Now, we're getting ready, as I kicked off the show by saying, Father's Day weekend coming up. That means you're hanging out and you're grilling meat and you're just having cookouts and stuff like that. Dads sort of like that sort of thing. Dads like to be the one kind of manning the grill a lot there too. Well, as you're getting ready for all of that, all of those delicious items in the grill, stuff in the cooler, which is also kind of important when it comes to celebrating Dad, everything you need for a great Father's Day, you can get that right now at your local Kroger. So shop in store, take advantage of that, or online you can learn more too, including how you can become a Kroger Boost member to get the most out of your Father's Day weekend. Kroger.com/boost if you want to check that out. We love Kroger. We love Father's Day. We love the way that Kroger gets us ready for Father's Day. All of that is just a lot of fun. And we're going to, speaking of fun, a lot more fun stuff coming up for you on the program here today. Now, I mentioned the Alabama quarterback situation a moment ago. Before we're done, we actually have some interesting intel on that from one of the official particulars involved with making the decision about who that might be. We'll give you that before we're done today. More reasons to get excited about the 2025 season. We got some good stuff for you on that here too. And by the way, it's been a massive week for Georgia recruiting. We've had, 4 important prospects reaffirm their pledge to UGA. 2 offensive linemen have committed. 2 specialists have committed, including a kicker yesterday. It's been incredibly busy. Jeff Sentell fills us in on all the details on that here coming up in just a little bit. So it's jam-packed here on a Friday. You've picked a great day to be with us. In fact, let's keep it going right now as we go around the DawgHouse, presented today by Zagoria Law. Now, let me tell you something here for a moment you sort of already know. I would say the audience of a show like this is a really good degree different than the audience of some other kinds of shows. And this is not me pandering. This is not me being self-serving. Let me describe this in a way that you can easily understand. We do a show for an audience that is kind of defined by an insatiable appetite for college football. In fact, that's the origin story for this show. I was doing some different kinds of sports media stuff, 10, 15, 20 years ago, sort of saw that the college football fan was not served as well as he could be, sort of realizing, oh, you know what? There's a hole in the market when it comes to college football content other than the college football season. People give lip service to it, but actually serving the college football fan, we kind of recognize that as a hole in the market. And we also believe there could be a market in the hole, that we could create a business around the fact that there was just a desire for more college football content around Georgia, around the SEC than existed at the time. And that's kind of how we were started. We recognized that there were Georgia fans who wanted to hear about Georgia every single day of the year, spring, summer, into fall, of course, and that we could serve them for that. And so by doing that, we also knew we were going to attract sort of a different level of fan. We were going to attract a fan that's just a little bit more plugged in than kind of the fly-by-night stuff or the sort of low information, stuff that may exist other places. We're going to sort of attract a little bit of a different kind of fan. And so if you were hearing the sound of my voice right now, whether you're watching me or listening to me via podcast, in all likelihood, you are one of those fans. In fact, you're probably thinking, yeah, I guess I am kind of one of those fans. So as one of those fans, let me tell you something that you can notice that the sort of, I guess, less plugged in fan might not notice. That for a long time, pre-internet even, this time of year sort of been known as talking season. I forget, I should know more about this. Was it Steve Spurrier who introduced the idea of talking season? I don't know who introduced us to the idea of talking season. Maybe it was Spurrier, some old-time coach. That this time of year, it's, the old school days, it was coaches kind of going to like the rubber chicken circuit, booster club meetings. There would be, whether you go back to radio, things like that, there would just be this sort of chatter about, well, what about this and maybe that? And somewhere along the way, the idea of like the hot take was born. And we kind of have a little bit more of a crystallized idea of what a hot take is now because we have so many different ways to express them. Some people do it on TV. Some people may write it. Some people post it on social media. Some people spew it on streaming video. Some people vomit it out on podcasts. There's just so many different ways to kind of create hot takes now. We have a little bit more idea of like what the hot take industrial complex sort of looks like. So as someone like yourself who is really plugged into college football, here is something interesting that you can notice that someone who's just sort of less informed and perhaps less plugged in, they just simply won't be aware of. which is during like the height of talking season, the deepest part of the summer, the hot takes will never be worse. But over the course of the summer, as summer turns to fall, the hot takes actually become a little bit more reasonable. Now, the reason why that's true is very simple, which is media, by and large, likes attention. I'm no different. You certainly wouldn't do, this for a living and hope that no one saw or listened or reacted to what you said. That would be invisible, and that's never good if you're trying to do this as a business. Of course, you want some level of attention for what you do. However, while you want attention, you also don't want to be wrong. Just natural ego instinct is, it's not great to be wrong. So in the sort of height of the offseason, when you're as far removed from games as you possibly can be, well, you can just sort of spew whatever, because by the time we actually get to games months later, nobody really remembers what was said. It all kind of just sort of disappears into the ether, and who knows? I mean, it all just sort of vanishes into the whatever. It's all just sort of gone. But if you say something crazy as the season gets closer, well, now you're a lot more proximal to immediate feedback. And all of a sudden now the crazy thing that you said, like 5 weeks later, we're like, well, that's clearly wrong, because we've got now games to prove who's right and who's wrong with all the crazy stuff they've been saying. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about here. And I don't say this, I like the people involved here. I am really entertained by the SEC network. I think they do, for the most part, pretty good job of covering college football. They kind of, I think reflect the passion for the SEC with the guys and gals they put on TV. I think they're, by and large, pretty entertaining. Even a guy like, say, Chris Doering, for instance. Doering's a former Gator, but Doering's been on our show many times. I like him. I think personally he's a really nice guy. I think he's a sharp dude. He's a Gator, but, we don't, we hate the Gators. We don't necessarily hate the people connected to the Gators. That's not really the way life works necessarily. I don't really have a lot bad to say about Doering. But as you know, a few weeks ago, at least if you're a regular listener, viewer of our show, a few weeks ago, Doering said the craziest thing ever about how somehow so it's Peter Burns that says this, but Doering's a part of the show. Pardon me for not remembering correctly. That somehow the SEC now runs through Texas, despite the fact that Georgia, the reigning SEC champs, had also beaten Texas twice. So you're going to hear Peter Burns, Doering's on the radio show with them. This was a few weeks ago. It's sort of the example of the sort of crazy hot takes that you sort of hear when you're as deep into the offseason as you could possibly get from Sirius XM radio just a few weeks ago. Take a listen to this.
If you're going to look at the numbers, the SEC does not run through Georgia right now. The SEC powerhouse are the Texas Longhorns.
So there you go. Now, if we shorten that clip just to give ourselves some time here, but certainly Chris Doering's not like, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. Doering's also nodding along and agreeing, and so that's a little bit of an example of how bad the hot takes can be in sort of the deepest part of the offseason. But as you get a little closer to the start of the season, one of the things you may notice from whichever media personalities you gravitate towards is that the takes actually start to get a little bit more sensible and things start to get a little bit more stabilized. For instance, how about an example of this here? Once again, on TV, SEC Network, Doering was with Peter Burns a moment ago. Doering on TV this week, instead of saying that the SEC runs through Texas and Texas somehow runs the SEC, and apparently nobody remembers that Georgia beat Texas twice a year ago. Now when it comes to the Georgia-Texas comparison, with obviously Texas coming to Athens here in November, now the takes around Georgia and Texas, they're starting to get just a little bit more sensible. This is from TV this week when more of these game times were announced, including the flex spot for Georgia and Texas. This is Chris Doering on the subject of Georgia and Texas now. Take a listen to this.
Earlier that Kirby needs to find a way to beat Alabama. Well, Sark needs to find a way to beat Georgia. If they are going to be the kings of the SEC like everybody says, they got to get over their Bulldog problem. Yes. Arch Manning will try to do that against the Georgia defense that we know is always physical, always fast. Cannot wait for this ball game. This may be a preview of what we get to see again on December 6th in Atlanta.
So it's a small point, doesn't necessarily matter all that much, but just notice this. If you want to go back a few weeks ago, we were hearing people say, Georgia's not even a top 10 team, Georgia's a candidate that missed the college football playoff, and, all of that. And as you get a little closer to it, start reading your magazines, AP poll comes out soon, coaches poll comes out week prior to that. What you really see is Georgia's like right there around 4th or 5th, and maybe they'll finish better than that, maybe they'll finish worse than that, but they're a preseason number 4, number 5 type team, among the shortest odds of all to certainly be back in the playoff, if not win the national championship. And the same kind of thing here. Weeks ago, it's, Texas runs the SEC now. This conference runs through Austin. Now it's, Georgia did beat Texas twice a year ago. Maybe it's Texas who has a little bit of a Bulldog problem. Maybe they got to figure out how to handle Georgia if they really want to be the best program they could possibly be. Just something to notice, just something to file away. Some of the crazy takes that you've endured for the last few weeks, there'll be less of that as we get closer to the season because we're getting a little closer to feedback. We're getting a little closer to accountability. And in the face of accountability, you sometimes find the takes get just a little bit kind of more in bounds and perhaps a little easier to digest. We'll make that around the DawgHouse here today, presented by our friends at Zagoria Law. Now, if you've been out, and this is the time of year when people are outside, they're at parks, they're in their neighborhood. People like to be outside when it's not raining. It feels like it rains every day now. But when it's not raining this time of year, people like to be outside. But oftentimes when you are outside, there's a confrontation that created by that. Let's say that a dog gets loose. Knocks you down, you break your arm, or in the worst scenario, it gets free and it bites you or bites one of your children or someone you love. Well, in a situation like that, we believe if you've been bitten or injured by a dog that wasn't yours, owner perhaps negligent in the care they were taking for their own animal, then you deserve your chance to fight for compensation like any other personal injury situation. In fact, that's what our friends at Zagoria Law have specialized in. Now statewide, serving people who've been bitten by a dog or knocked over, injured by a dog, getting you the kind of compensation you think you deserve for pain and suffering, medical bills, things like that. Like any other personal injury situation, that is what you might have your chance to do. And our friends at Zagoria Law literally wrote the book on how to win these kinds of cases. They are specialized in this. They're the only law firm in Georgia that specializes this very, very narrow, very, very specific area of personal injury law. So if this is your situation, if you've been bitten by a dog, if you've been injured by a dog, if someone you love has that story and you say, boy, this owner didn't take proper care, there was negligence involved here, then wouldn't you want to work with folks who kind of work on these kinds of cases every day? We would say, of course, you should, no matter where you are across the state of Georgia. So please give them a call, 833-GA-DOG-BITE. That's dog spelled D-O-G, 833-GA-DOG-BITE, or online, ZagoriaLaw.com, Z-A-G-O-R-I-A, ZagoriaLaw.com. Our friends at Zagoria Law know how to win these types of cases. So if that's your situation, then be in it to win it with our friends at Zagoria Law. Let me give you one more opportunity to contact them. Online, ZagoriaLaw.com, or give them a call, 833-GA-DOG-BITE. That's 833-GA-DOG-BITE. So glad to have you with us here today. Glad to have our friends at Zagoria Law, a part of Around the DawgHouse. And we got so much more for you before our show is done, including, if you can't tell, we're excited about the upcoming season. And we're going to give you an even bigger reason to be excited about all these big games on the Georgia schedule. We've got more on that before you're done, and information on who exactly might be at the quarterback spot for Alabama when Georgia hosts them in September. That is all on the way. But for now, busy week for Georgia recruiting, and it doesn't slow down as we head towards the weekend. So let's cover it all right now. Here today with our DawgNation recruiting insider, Jeff Sentell, on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let us say hello to Jeff Sentell. Busy time for Georgia recruiting. In fact, Jeff, let's start most recent, work our way back, and then we'll get to the upcoming weekend. Georgia got 2 specialist commits here this weekend, including a kicker yesterday. I guess give me something on the new place kicker commit to Georgia. This is the most recent recruiting news, so I guess let's start with that if you don't mind.
Yeah. Good morning, Brandon. Good morning, everybody. So I'll be honest. There used to be a way that we looked in kind of off-cycle specialist commitments. And what does that mean? That means when Georgia, it used to be in the day and age when Georgia gave a scholarship to one punter, and then that punter would kick for Georgia for 4 years before he moved on to the NFL or he was out of eligibility. Same thing with the kicking position. And then any backups were preferred walk-ons. Well, in this new 105 house settlement era, you've got to look at it a little bit differently. Your backups, especially ones with versatility, like for instance, in Haran Zerkat's situation, he's the number 4 punter in the country. He's the number 1 kicker in the country. And he's also has an amazing kickoff leg. And Georgia is bringing him in, number 1, because he has an outstanding leg, but he is going to have an apprenticeship for 1 season while, those folks that realize Peyton Woodring is clearly the Georgia starter, and he'll have 1 more year of eligibility next year. So he's going into this thing thinking that, hey, probably going to redshirt. We'll at least compete with Peyton because Peyton will take 1 more year of kind of trying to do everything for Georgia to enhance his draft status, because I do think Peyton Woodring will be an NFL kicker. So he comes in, and it was really interesting, Brendan. The stories we like to find is he had kicked for Georgia, and he basically was one of those instant commitments for the Dogs. He told Kirby Smart and Georgia's special teams coach, Coach Benedict, that he was going to be a Dog. But he wanted to wait and finish out his camp circuit, which meant 1 more trip to Ohio State to kick for them and just evaluate and try to earn an offer. And they decide on it. They put a pin in it. They make the plan. Well, Zerkat and his family, they're walking out to the parking lot, and they're at their car, and they're like, what are we doing? And they go through the pros and cons, and they're like, what are we waiting for? So Haran basically runs back into the Butts-Mehre complex, texts Coach Smart, texts Coach Benedict, and he says, hey, man, can you come back down? Something I want to tell you. And he's like, let's just go ahead and be a commitment. Let's not wait. Let's not go through any more motions. He was that excited to be a Dog.
And also, this kind of comes on the heels of Wade Register, I guess, is the number 1 punter in the country who committed to Georgia like just a day prior to that. So Georgia trying to clean house here with 2, at least by the Coles kicking service and the people who kind of rate the specialists, which is obviously very different than how the other positions get rated. Georgia kind of cleaning house with both these guys right now.
Brandon, let's do some quick math here. If you have the number 1 punter in the country and the number 1 kicker in the country, is that pretty good? How would you describe that?
No, it is. And I say this all the time. If you could thin slice a football game and tell me 1 piece of information, I could do well to predict the winner of the game if I only knew this 1 piece of information, and that is simply average starting field position for my team and the other team. If I just knew that 1 piece of information, that would go a long way towards determining almost more than any other sort of thin slice piece of information. That'd tell me almost everything I needed to know. I think that average starting field position is one of the hidden keys to victory that just doesn't get talked about enough because it's kind of boring. And obviously you want to make field goals and things like that, but honestly, avoiding field goal tries is sometimes kind of the name of the game. But field position matters, not giving up a touchdown like happened against Notre Dame, or making sure the opposing offense begins its drive, if you can, inside the 25, and inside the 20 is even better than that. If you're putting an opposing offense in a long field, if you're starting on a short field, that is a cheat code in terms of how you win football games. So I always want a good place kicker. I always want a good kickoff specialist, really want a good punter. I don't like punting, but if I have to punt, I want the best one I can get because I want to pin them deep, because a long field is a great friend to a defense.
Brandon, 2 quick things. Number 1, that's actually a very football savvy, smart guy thing to say. Now, I know people come to your quality program for those things, but you're actually impressing me with the football acumen this morning, man. I like that. Number 2, I guess this is the constant, never-ending search for the purity that remains in college football, Brandon. Kickers especially. By and large, they will decide the balance of games, big games. I'm thinking road games in enemy territory, probably still more than any other. At least the game will be on the line with their services. And by and large, Brandon, the kickers are still not heavy into the NIL, the bags, the compensation markets, and everything else like that. Side note, Wade Register out of Trinity Christian in Dublin, who knew he wanted to be a dog for a while. He silently committed after kicking camp in early June. He gave me a note last night about Haran. He said, and I quote, "There's no doubt Georgia got the number one kicker in the country this year."
That's certainly exciting, and it's been a busy week for Georgia. Also, 2 interior offensive linemen committed to Georgia, both from programs we have great respect for. Feels like Zyke Helton as a prospect has been kind of in our lives now for a good number of years, former Alabama commit, but just a guy we've been talking about for a long time, and I think you've done a good job sort of telling his story about how he's battled illness and obviously kind of dealt with some weight challenges related to that. Getting up to the right weight, I should say, has been a little bit of a challenge there, but he certainly thrived. It would certainly seem as of late. Then you think about the young man from North Gwinnett, who's obviously, once again, also from a program we like, coach that we like, and Eric Godfrey. And when you bring in, I would say, 2 guys like this, it's just the sort of important building blocks that's sort of always been true. In this day and age, maybe it's even more true, where you got to have guys who want to be here. You got to have guys who kind of, to a degree, bleed red and black. I thought you did a good job with Kaylee Manziel talking about this on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger on Wednesday. It's a locker room contribution. It's the kind of thing that sort of gives you resources to go out and sort of fight the more contested recruitments, which you got to be able to sort of do some of that kind of stuff too. But these are important building blocks. They are admittedly not as famous as some of the other names we typically speak about in this space, but there's never been a Georgia team that didn't have to have guys like this, nor will there be a Georgia team in the future that doesn't have to have these sort of important, positive contributors who are proud to be wearing that red and black. Tell us about these 2 offensive line commits for Georgia here this week.
I think the best way I can say it in this era, Brandon, of buying players is I still think Georgia is in the business of, they're not trying to buy players, they're trying to sell Georgia. And what I mean by that is they want players that absolutely want to be there. Zachary Lewis, Brandon, everybody's got that archetype in their family about how you grew up rooting for the dogs, maybe mom's yelling at the TV, dad's yelling at the TV, the dogs barking at the TV, everybody's jumping up and down. You remember those Keely Ringo videos when Georgia broke the drought? Well, I've been told that was like that a lot in the Lewis house. And once he decided he wanted to be that Georgia gave him a committable offer, there was really not much more to that. And Zyke is an example of, Brandon, he was a big boy early in his high school career. And I'll always file away the memory of seeing him at prospect camps, like All-American camps, where he's still working, he's still being one of the final 5 guys, and he's still blocking dudes. But he's doing it at like 230, 240 pounds because he had an illness. He'd lost a lot of weight, like 60, 70 pounds. And it's been kind of a 1.5-year struggle for him to get back to his weight, that the weight of an elite Power 5 offensive line room like the one Stacy Searles champions for Georgia. So you got 2 guys, we like to find funny little snide comments. It looks like Coach Searles is trying to corner the market on interior offensive linemen whose first names begin with the letter Z. But you've got 2 guys from really ball-playing, high-level Georgia high school programs. They want to be a dog. I think Zyke has made it clear that he would wanted to been a dog for some time, and it was kind of a matter of getting the green light. So, again, you can buy all the players you want in this era, but I think what Georgia is doing a great job is selling those guys, Brandon. And when you get a lot of those guys, to use football vernacular here in the foxhole with you, and you have a lot of guys that are really going to be ticked off and they're really going to be kicking the tires on their car if they ever see Georgia lose a game, or if Georgia loses, they feel gut punched and let down. I think no matter how many future first-round draft picks you have, if you have a room that's kind of balanced out with those type of personalities, you're going to have a really hardworking and achieving room, and I think that's what Georgia's doing right here.
I want to ask you before we're done about obviously all the visitors coming to Athens this weekend. That's gigantic. Let me do one thing before we get there, though, which is this week we also saw, by my count, 4 pretty important prospects shut down their recruitment, reaffirming their pledge to UGA, saying they're done. Wide receiver Brady Marchese, defensive backs Justice Fitzpatrick, Jordan Smith, and also the outstanding defensive line prospect Seven Cloud. The assumption a lot of us make is that, boy, these 4 guys doing this right around the time that the sort of the house settlement and the revenue sharing kicks in, this feels too close together to be coincidental. How much of this is related to the new revenue sharing stuff and the fact that these guys presumably are, signing some paperwork with Georgia to get that. How much did what we see this week with those shutdowns, how much did that relate to the new revenue sharing world that these recruits are going to participate in?
Brandon, I do believe it was linked. I know where your tinfoil hat is theorying right there, and I'm with you because I do believe players in this day and age, including at the University of Georgia, they get compensated or they sign language that details that they're shutting it down. I think it's parlance for the world we live in today, Brandon, but like I did the math with Before the Hedges and Kaylee, our show Before the Hedges show with Kaylee Manziel this week. And Georgia currently has, counting the kickers now, the punter and the kicker, I believe Georgia currently has now 14, 15 commitments in the class. And it seems to me, I think there's been strong shutdown terminology from about 12 of them. So I don't think that's purely coincidental. I think that's part of the world we live in, Brandon. Now, these guys were already committed. And really what this means, and I've heard some people ask me that question this week, well, if USC comes in with $10 million, are they still shut down? Probably not. Let's be real. But what it means is, aside from I'm never going to burn a bridge, where you hear recruits say that because this guy might be my offensive coordinator or head football coach in the NFL one day, but they're not going to visit other schools. They're not going to entertain those offers. They're not going to have those weekly meetings with phone calls, chats, FaceTimes with other schools. They are by and large shut down, but Brendan, a lot of these situations, it actually does these young people a favor. What I've noticed more in the last 2 years than ever before is recruits are definitely weary of carrying the burden of, like, most people don't understand this, Brandon, but like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of the week, like if you're a big time recruit like Tyler Atkinson, for instance, you may have Oregon on Monday, you may have Georgia on Tuesday, you may have Ohio State on Wednesday, you may have Auburn on Thursday, and you may have Alabama on Friday. And these are weekly calls with some depth in order to try and build a relationship. Man, after a while, a lot of these kids, man, are just done with it. They're like, I'm done with it. I mean, maybe we like to have a joke and have fun here a lot, Brandon. Maybe we reach the point during marriage, courtships, and during engagement where the future grooms are also saying, I'm shut down in my bachelorhood well in advance of the marriage dates and everything else like that. But yes, I do think they're connected. And yes, I do think it's kind of crazy now that you have to look at Georgia's commitment board. And there's some glaring names who haven't said they've shut down, like Vance Spafford, who will be in town this weekend, one of those official visitors now, that when that guy hasn't given the shutdown sign, like the bat signal, that's something to be very interested in.
No doubt. Now, this weekend, it's massive for Georgia. Headliners, I guess Jared Curtis expected to be there. Tyler Atkinson certainly expected to be there. That's a monumental moment in this 2026 class. Derek Cooper, I believe, too. Tell us more about what is coming into Georgia here this week.
I think this is the biggest one, Brandon, and I don't say that just because of the star power, but it's also the one that has the most commitments in town and the ones that will really be trying to urge and coax the undecided and the uncommitted to come into the fold, so to speak. I mean, it's not going to be Kirby Smart giving altar calls or anything else like that, but I think this is the one where it's the major class building part. Like, obviously, Atkinson is extremely complicated these days because of the financial numbers being thrown around, but Curtis and Atkinson would be your defensive and offensive captain, two core leaders of your team, and you can think of none better than those two guys. And, when we remember Kirby Smart saying fire, passion, and energy, well, that's everything that's everything he said he would pay a premium for. The question is, how big of a premium will you pay for Atkinson as the market numbers are kind of soaring upward right now? And, Curtis is a guy that, you think maybe he'll be able to talk to Spafford and maybe kind of let that one kind of stay tethered to the Dogs. But I think a big one is Cooper. And for a lot of reasons is that Georgia, we say this all the time these days where, Georgia used to be RBU, at least in the clear minds of the DawgNation fan base. And they don't have as many home run hitters as those stallion future second round, first round draft picks in the backfield. Part of that was fueled by economics. And I think Cooper, and we saw Savion Hyder last week, I think those are the two best chances for Georgia to get one of those elite national running backs, the one that you put the ball in his belly and there's a chance he could take it to the house from anywhere on the field. That's that fear factor that I think Georgia needs. We continue to advance the thinking that the class will be built around Curtis, and offensively wise, you want a lot of playmakers around Curtis to make him look good, to amplify his talents. We use the archer and the quiver you need a lot of arrows in the quiver for Curtis. Cooper would be a very good one. Retaining Spafford would be a very good one as well. Also on the low, I know you know this young man at Buford High School, Tyreek Green. Yeah. He has actually moved up his official visit date to this weekend. He's seen Auburn. I believe he's seen other schools of late. I think Tyreek Green is a Georgia priority, but at the same time, Brandon, you and I have said this before a lot. There may be only 2 or 3 seats left in the carriage for the defensive backs in the 2026 recruiting class train. And I think there's about 3 or 4 viable names that could claim that ticket and jump on the train, so to speak. And I think Green is clearly one of those.
How about the Hawaiian offensive lineman, Malachi Lee? We've heard some about him as of late. He coming in this weekend, it's obviously a long way to travel in a year in which I would say the offensive line situation, pretty deep in 2027, a little bit of a different kind of, I guess, profile of depth for the 2026 class. What kind of opportunity does Georgia have with Malachi Lee, the offensive lineman out of Hawaii right now?
Well, I think this is the 15th round, so to speak, and I think they're getting him for an unofficial. That's awesome because his official visit was for G-Day. It feels like definitely Michigan is the team that's also in the ring with Georgia right here. And Brandon, we got to be honest. Michigan has great facilities. They have deep pockets, and they have a strong offensive line tradition of putting their guys in the league. And I think that's what Georgia has to go head-to-head here with Malachi Lee. There's different points of this recruitment where it felt like, okay, Georgia was just a visit because they were the first one. But I do feel Georgia really set the bar very high for Malachi Lee with that decision. And there's been ebbs and flows in this recruitment. Brandon, there is some late buzz, I must admit, about Malachi potentially getting to be a dog simply because of scarcity, Brandon. Really, if you had to say Georgia's best 2 chances as a tackle right now, much less a high-profile top 150 overall prospect, it's Malachi Lee and Ekene Oboko, who just visited last week. I'm going to say this, Brandon, because I feel like it's right. If Georgia's offensive line class becomes complete without Lee or without Oboko, something went wrong.
Certainly interesting to consider. Any final thought from you on all the guys coming in, what you expect to happen, something we should be watching for, or just sort of a mood that you're detecting when it comes to the 2026 class for Georgia? What would you leave us with?
Yeah, I think it's just, the big one has to happen this week. And, we looked at a lot of these names and, there's 2 guys, one guy that I'm really high on that won't be in this week, I'm told. He's a late scratch from earlier in the week, is Valden Sone. That's the young man out of Sweden who just picked up an offer from Ohio State. He has literally tore up camps as part of PPI recruits. Brendan, he's very impressive. I think he is vaulted through continually camping at Georgia to the top of the defensive line board, where you see other names like, James Johnson maybe leaning towards Texas or leaning towards the hometown Miami Hurricanes. That's a guy that would not only be a great fit for Georgia, he would be an exclamation point for Georgia in the defensive line class. His official visit, I'm told, will be rescheduled. And the other thing to think about is you just have all these core commitments. You've got Zach Fort, Lincoln Keys coming in. You've got, really talented young man, Brandon. Some of these guys even started their official visits yesterday. Corey Howard, the big twitchy 6'6", 275-pounder out of Valdosta. He started his official visit last night because there's so many of these. And you start looking at it, Brandon, there's literally going to be like 55 official visitors in the last 3 or 4 weeks for Georgia. And through this, you've seen some churn where you're going to get a couple of commitments out of every one of these official visit weekends. And I think the long play there is you'll see another couple choose to commit to the G as well.
Jeff, great stuff. Happy Father's Day to you. Hope you have a great weekend with your family, and we'll look forward to speaking to you very soon here back again on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
Thanks, Brandon, man. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So one of the things I think about when it comes to five-star linebacker Tyler Atkinson that Jeff mentioned earlier is it's an interesting thing that football teams do, and it's a little bit different than maybe what some fans might sometimes encourage them to do. Now, listen, don't get this twisted. Every Georgia fan, of course, wants Tyler Atkinson in Georgia's recruiting class. He's the kind of prospect that would demand that sort of enthusiasm on the part of fans. But he's also kind of some of what Georgia has had. Georgia right now has, let's say, 4 inside linebackers that rank among the nation's best backups that could potentially be all-conference, all-American type players if they were playing elsewhere. This feels like a place where Georgia is strong, and so therefore I think that some of the enthusiasm around Atkinson might be a little different than if Atkinson played a different position in which Georgia didn't have quite such a history of strength. In other words, fans like to see football teams fix their weaknesses. Football teams themselves in the NFL draft, in the college recruiting game, one of the things you consistently see is they like to make sure their strength stays strong. That programs, organizations, whether it's college or the NFL, they just sort of have playing personalities. They just sort of have a profile for the team, and it includes some strengths. And those, teams, those organizations, those programs, they like to make sure their strengths stay strong. So when you look at a guy like Tyler Atkinson, that is the best way to continue an area in which Georgia's been literally probably the best in the entire country. No one's produced inside linebackers the way that Georgia has. Atkinson would be the next generation of that, and we'll see how that visit goes for him and the University of Georgia here this weekend. With that said, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, and let's get ready for a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation for you sometime here in 2025. Our friend Jessica Slater standing by to tell you all about it. Whether it's the debut of Star of the Seas coming this August, you start thinking about the awesome, exciting stuff with Royal Beach Club getting going in December. How about taking Star of the Seas to Royal Beach Club in Nassau later on this year? You get a chance to do that. Or if you start looking far into the future, how about the brand new Perfect Day Mexico for those of you who like sailing on the western side of the Caribbean, going down there and enjoying all of that. There's a Royal Beach Club coming to Cozumel too. There are just so many fun, exciting things happening with Royal Caribbean. Obviously, Star of the Seas, what we're thinking about right now, because it's sort of the next big thing. But boy, there is some great stuff happening here right now. So give Jessica Slater a call. She can tell you all about it. 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She'll get you ready for a great one. You want a weekend sailing on Utopia of the Seas? You want a big 7-night sailing on Star of the Seas? Icon of the Seas, going out of the port of Miami? Whatever you're excited about, Royal Caribbean's got it for you. This brand is red hot right now. And when Royal Caribbean said, hey, here's who we want you to work with to make your Royal Caribbean cruise vacation even better, that's how we became friends with Jessica Slater. And we love everything that she does for you on that. All right. Let us get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean for a moment. So we talked about the Alabama quarterback situation a little earlier, and our belief that while nothing's guaranteed, when you think about a big game for Georgia against Alabama, given the fact that the Alabama quarterback is also going to be inexperienced, not impossible to think that Gunner Stockton could be the better of those two quarterbacks on that particular day. Well, speaking of that, new Alabama offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb, you'll remember the story here, supposed to be the OC a year ago, moved with Kalen DeBoer from Washington to Alabama, but ultimately the Seattle Seahawks offered him a job as offensive coordinator there, stayed in Seattle to work with the Seahawks. That didn't go well, and now he's at Alabama, the place he was sort of originally designed to be all along. Well, anyway, Grubb was on local radio station, Tide 100.9. Our friends down there in Tuscaloosa, I was actually on the show with them last Friday. We've known those guys for a long time. Grubb was on the radio there. Grubb was asked if he says if Alabama. So the question was posed this way: if Alabama were to play this Saturday, would Ty Simpson be the guy? Grubb's answer, this is a quote, yes, he is right now. We don't really deal in absolutes until we have to. At the end of the day, if we're playing a football game tomorrow, Ty Simpson would start. This is going back to April, kind of a similar quote. He's earned that. I know that that's the line everybody's looking for, but that is what he earned. So there's kind of where you are right now. Simpson, who's been there, frankly, picked over before, other quarterbacks selected instead of Simpson. But as of right now, the leader in that Alabama quarterback battle, according to the offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubb, who went on the record with an interview this week with a local radio station there in Tuscaloosa. Now, we've said before, if you want to go back to earlier days in the Nick Saban era, oftentimes we saw the veteran quarterback who'd waited his turn. He might start only to be supplanted later on in the year. Think about Cooper Bateman, for instance, probably circa 2015. Something like that sort of happened. They used to happen for Nick Saban quite a bit, kind of prior to that run of like Jalen Hurts to Tua Tagovailoa to Mac Jones to Bryce Young that kind of finished off his career. There was a time in which Alabama was pretty comfortable with open competitions extending into the fall. Maybe we'll see Kalen DeBoer do a version of that, but it's pretty interesting. DeBoer, when asked about this stuff, has been pretty clear. In this particular case, Grubb pretty clear too. Not mixing words, not intentionally obscuring the information here. If there was a quarterback for Alabama right now, it would be Ty Simpson. I would say that Simpson's potentially less spectacular than the other options here, but he has been around. So kind of file that away, getting more information now about who the Alabama quarterback might be. And admittedly, this is not necessarily the guy we thought it might be. Let me move on to this. We've talked about Brian Kelly already this week. We think that Kelly, I don't know, some of his public statements at times can be a little weird. For instance, the other day, he was out there calling out the Big Ten. We didn't appreciate that necessarily because we don't think that Kelly's done enough to kind of ingratiate himself to SEC fans. He's not helping us carry the load well enough right now to be out there talking trash to any of our enemies right now. And part of the reason we feel that way about Kelly is they've had a nasty habit of poorly performing in their week one non-conference games. A couple losses to Florida State, which is kind of embarrassing. What's really embarrassing is the fact they lost to USC to begin last season. LSU should just simply be better than this. And this year they get that big early season game against Clemson. And this week, Brian Kelly's talking about that, saying, this is from that same ESPN College Game Day podcast we talked about yesterday. Kelly's saying, they are exciting openers, and unfortunately we have not done well in those openers and haven't had the outcomes that we wanted. He says Clemson's going to be a great challenge, but one that more than I think anything else, we have a football team that can go on the road, and that's what you have to do. You have to have a defense that travels. We finally have got the roster in position where these are the kinds of games you want to go and play, and you need to win them. I'm not going to make any other statements other than the fact that we need to win the opener. Now, for as much as I sometimes dislike Brian Kelly's comments, I actually don't hate that at all. I do think it's appropriate to acknowledge, for a program like LSU, you can't be losing to Florida State, especially sort of this version of Florida State the last few years. Even, a Florida State team building itself towards contention. LSU is just supposed to be better than that. And you certainly can't lose to Lincoln Riley and USC, especially when the narrative of Lincoln Riley kind of running from the SEC because he was afraid of that competition. You can't give him the win to stand as a retort against that criticism. That was, frankly, one of the more embarrassing losses that an SEC team has suffered in recent years. And so now it's Clemson, a Clemson team, by the way, that's sort of back in the national championship conversation. This is a pressure-packed game. Playing in the other Death Valley is a really big deal. And it is a game for all the offseason attention LSU's gotten. Full stop, flat out, LSU does need to win it. It's also interesting to note that Brian Kelly says we've kind of finally got our roster in place here with a chance to contend and win a game like this. Obviously, the insinuation there is when they had a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback like Jaden Daniels, who looks like kind of the toast of the NFL as the best rookie quarterback in the league a year ago, the fact they didn't have that roster in place when he was the guy, boy, I think that speaks to just how kind of problematic the situation has been. But getting the gift of an extra year of Garrett Nussmeier, apparently LSU doesn't want to get that wrong anymore. So pretty interesting words there from Brian Kelly, acknowledging the challenge of playing week one against Clemson. Let me also finish with this. The other day we talked about Vince Marrow, the former Kentucky assistant. We kind of laughed at what he once said, a little bit of trash talk related to Georgia. We probably didn't do enough, though, to talk about the actual merits of this story. The fact that Marrow, the tight ends coach, the recruiting coordinator, leaves to go become general manager at Louisville. Marrow telling ESPN about this, that Jeff Brom, the head coach, and I have known each other for 25 years. I've always admired and respected him and the Brom family. He says, I also love the state of Kentucky. This has become my home. The opportunity to take on this new and exciting role in the state where I have so many incredible relationships was something I could not pass up, explaining why he left, which from his perspective, you can kind of understand. There was also reporting in Lexington, though, the last few days that Mark Stoops was caught completely unaware by all of this, did not know Marrow was considering taking this job until it was already announced via social media that he was leaving. Y'all, that's a huge blow to the Kentucky situation. And we've said before that, Mark Stoops clearly does not want to be in Lexington. He tried to take the Texas A&M job. Their fans revolted. He had nowhere to go, so therefore he came back. I think that he's tired of Lexington. I think that Lexington's sort of tired of him. And now you've got this guy who's been really instrumental in helping you bring in talent. He's not going to do the same thing for your hated in-state rival. This is a Louisville program from a football standpoint that just should not exist on the same plane as Kentucky. But with Jeff Brom, who is a really good in-game coach, not a great talent acquirer, but a really good in-game coach, to bring in your talent acquisition arm to pair with his in-game coaching skills, this is Louisville, at least by appearances, really getting over on Kentucky, and frankly, you just can't have this. We are kind of looking at a landscape the last couple of years where there is debate ongoing about, well, is the SEC still the SEC? In a roundabout way, these two stories I've discussed back-to-back kind of tie into that. For the SEC to be the SEC, which obviously is to the benefit of Georgia, you need LSU to win its Week 1 non-conference games against the likes of Florida State or USC, or this year being Clemson. And frankly, for these schools in the east part of the conference footprint that have in-state rivals from the other league, you can't let your recruiting coordinator hop ship and go to the other place. You just can't do that. That ought to be embarrassing. And it certainly seems like Kentucky's on the precipice of change, whether they just flat out fire Stoops finds a different job, or he's young enough that he wouldn't have to do this, but maybe he just chooses to retire. One way or another, hard to imagine how the Stoops era lasts much longer than this. It just seems like that's a program primed for change, whether it wants it or not. And that is cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, we're going to have some fun here before we wrap things up here today. We're going to do our long drink, long finish. And I want to give a shout out to our great guy, Cody Chafe. He's not with us today. He's working from home. But on Tuesday's show, one of the conversations we sort of got into as it relates to the long finish, or I should say as it relates to the Georgia schedule, was the excitement we have about night game against Tuscaloosa. Let me see if I can speak in English here to close out the week. The excitement we have about a night game hosting Alabama, the fact that the Texas game looming, that we really feel like you're getting closer to the start of the season. And I think the game time announcements we've been getting as of late, I think only heightens the anticipation that the fans have, Georgia fans, me right there with you on this, that we all have about this season that's on its way. And so me, our guest that day, Connor Riley, Jake Fromm, we spent some time talking about that. Cody made a really nice video of this. If you're listening to podcasts, this is worth going to like our DawgNation Instagram page for, or the shorts page on our YouTube account, and sort of seeing this for yourself, because it's really a reminder of how much fun we have in the fall, and how much we all can't wait for that to be here. A lot of excitement. It'll be here before you know it. In honor of that, for our long drink, long finish, a video from earlier this week from our guy, Cody Chafe. Let's take a look at this. This is the home schedule that Georgia fans have dreamed of since, I've been alive.
Alabama coming to Georgia for the first time since 2015. Texas coming to Athens for the first time in program history. Ole Miss, I think of what that game meant a season ago there as well.
It is going to be such a cool and fun time this fall, especially as a fan, to be able to see these teams come and play in your backyard. It's going to be awesome.
What we're going to see happen between the hedges this year is absolutely amazing, completely remarkable. The value of a Georgia season ticket this year has never been higher. Is that not fun? Can't wait for that. Of course, as we enjoy those tailgates before all those big games, we know the Finnish long drink going to be flowing there for us, too. In fact, as you roll towards a Father's Day weekend, a great way to toast your dad is with the Finnish long drink as well. So if you go online, thelongdrink.com, you can put in your zip code. You can find out where you can pick some up today. Take your dad out to play golf. Take him to the pool here this weekend, or just have a cookout in your backyard. Whether it's the peach-flavored version, the Long Drink Zero, no carbs, no sugar, cranberry, my favorite, the traditional citrus, the blue can, the grapefruit flavor with the gin kick, or the Long Drink Strong. Maybe your dad deserves that here for his Father's Day. Toast him with some Finnish Long Drink. I think you'll be glad you did. It's a really fun part of all of your summer, no matter what your summer might be. I think you'll enjoy that. So find online thelongdrink.com for a lot more on that. Great to have the Finnish long drink as a part of our Long Finnish here on DawgNation Daily. And before we get ready to wrap things up here today, let me also give a shout out to our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau too, because we love great companies who are deeply connected to our home state. Because frankly, I'm a proud Georgian. It's the only state I'll ever live in. I'll be here till I die. What's the country song say? Bury me in Georgia. I promise I will be one day buried in Georgia. There is zero doubt of that. And for people who are just as connected and tied to the great state of Georgia as I am, our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau are that way. They serve Georgia's farmers. They have for a long time, but they can serve you too, whether you know how to plant something or not. Auto insurance, home insurance, these things that you have to have. Well, Georgia Farm Bureau, they're friendly agents. They're wonderful claims adjusters. They want to help you in those with those needs. So give them a call, 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050. You can also find them online, gfbinsurance.com. That is gfbinsurance.com. When you reach out, when you trust them for your home insurance, your auto insurance, your financial services needs, things of that nature, you're going to find out what I've been saying for a long time, which is that Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. And as we wrap up here today, we'll do so via Golden Shoe. So this is a little bit of a teaser. You can go find this for yourself if you want to. We just talked a good bit about LSU coach Brian Kelly. We would say that Kelly is a little bit of a strained personality. Some may say strange personality. We think there are certain aspects of Kelly that this personality is a little strained, a little hard to take at times. But we don't feel the same way about the previous LSU coach. Ed Orgeron, we're just kind of fans of. We think he's funny. He's obviously very successful. There's a certain aspect of his personality that made him successful. In fact, against Nick Saban, he sort of brought the fight to LSU to Alabama, and I didn't always win, but he made himself a tough customer, and arguably coach of the best team of all time. Well, Golden Shoe today goes out to Ed Orgeron because Alabama fan comes up to him. There's a video where he's trying. I don't know if we have this to show or not. Not sure. So there's a video here where the guy says, "Hey, pro tip: don't say Roll Tide to Coach O in the streets. They're in the beach." The guy comes up via video and is like, say Roll Tide. And then Ed Orgeron just berates the guy for what he calls disrespect. The way that Football Scoop wrote the headline was, "Video. Disrespectful Alabama fan finds out what happens when you ask Ed Orgeron for a picture while proclaiming Roll Tide." So very funny stuff. Orgeron kind of putting an end to that, challenging the young man to show some respect when he came up to him in public. It's really funny. We don't have the video. We just made the screenshot of it, but you can go check it out for yourself if you want to. And we'll give Ed Orgeron a Golden Shoe for that today. How about the lousy, stinking Gators and a Gatorade update about 1,679 days? That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That's our Gator hater update. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Actually, I should say Monday. Back here Monday, DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. Happy Father's Day, everybody. We will talk to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews cool down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, plumbing, electric, they show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that today. I'm going to give myself a little bit of a Father's Day gift, and I want to pop out of here pretty early today, but we'll take some of your comments here right now. So we'll read a few of these. We'll let all of you kind of get going on your Father's Day here today. All of this on my phone, by the way, for today. All right, let's see what's going on. It looks like we have a one-on-one argument going on at YouTube. So let me see if I can find something for the whole class here. Foster Moss says, to be fair, Brian Kelly has played for an SEC championship and he's had a Heisman winner. And that's true, Foster. You are right. This is the challenge, though, for a guy like Kelly, who left Notre Dame for the simple reason he didn't believe he could win a national championship there. Notre Dame was in the college football playoff. They had been kind of on the national scene, but not the sort of talent level that could win a national championship. We're going to find out if Marcus Freeman's capable of changing that. Obviously, they played for one a year ago. But Kelly left because he didn't think a national championship was a real possibility. He then comes to LSU, where the 3 previous head coaches before him had all won national championships. Ed Orgeron, not thought of as an all-time great coach, but he was the head coach of, as we said, maybe the all-time great team in 2019. Prior to that, Les Miles won a national championship in 2007. And prior to that, Nick Saban shared one in 2003. 3 previous LSU coaches all had won national titles. So Kelly did play in the SEC championship, and he did have a Heisman winner. But his tenure in Baton Rouge thus far, by LSU's previous standards, is a disappointment. And the big difference, and he was right to point this out, is how they performed in some of those week 1 games. I think that's the big difference. All right, let's get a few more comments. Frank Patterson talking about running backs in here. So we got a little bit from Jeff on Derek Cooper today, and obviously, kind of remaining to be seen where things stand from Savion Hyder last week. You don't hear a ton coming out of that, so perhaps read that into what you will. Let's see what else. Henry Dion firing back at some trolls in here. Listen, look, you've been around as long as we have, audience the size of ours. You're going to attract some trolls in here. There's no doubt about that. Brodo Baggins pointing out a year ago, Georgia had 36 drop passes, 964 yards, I guess, coming via those. Is that right? Of those 36 drop passes. So there you go. Missing from the Georgia offense a year ago, perhaps. Let's see what else. Paul Moon, going back to Brian Kelly, says, I have very little faith that Brian Kelly will get it done. Yeah, we'll see. I mean, obviously, I would say that of the SEC schedules, the LSU schedule, a little bit more manageable. That could be to his favor. And as he even himself mentioned, they've probably figured out certain aspects of the transfer portal for this year in a way they probably have not done in the past. This is, pound for pound, probably the best team on paper he's had. A veteran quarterback, played a lot now in the SEC. This could be a real shot for him. We'll see. Jonathan Aaron says, with the House settlement now, do you think Ohio State's going to clean up with wide receiver every year? I mean, we talked earlier about kind of making sure your strength stays strong. And for Ohio State, this is clearly their program strength. Brian Hartline is now the Ohio State offensive coordinator. And I do think that one of the things we need to do more of as we get in, that's the longtime wide receivers coach there, now offensive coordinator. I do think as we get more into the season, talking a little bit about coordinator changes. Jim Knowles, for instance, leaves Ohio State. He goes to Penn State. It's a big coordinator move. We talked about that back in the winter. I have not talked much about it since then. So there's going to be a lot of chatter around how coordinators impact things. For instance, one of the real hidden things that I think paved the way for Georgia to win national championship in 2021 was after Steve Sarkisian gets hired at Texas, they made a huge push for Dan Lanning as defensive coordinator. Lanning said no, stayed at Georgia. I thought that Lanning was a pretty important figure for Georgia in that first national championship. Now, he was head coach at Oregon by the time Georgia won the back-to-back titles, but I thought Lanning was a pretty big part of that 2021 team, and keeping him was I thought a pretty big deal. So coordinators, when they don't leave or when they do leave, can be significant. And Hartline, who's been a really good position coach, but now kind of getting into a bigger role. So your question of, well, can they always just clean house with wide receivers going forward? Honestly, I think a lot of this is going to be determined about how happy Hartline remains in Columbus, how successful he is kind of trying to get into a bigger role. Because we're led to believe that even in the midst of a national championship season, there was a little bit of dissension within the coaching ranks a year ago between, between, guys who had been there, guys who had kind of come in to kind of, at big paydays to sort of do their own thing. So sort of seeing what happens after the fact on that, I think, could be pretty interesting. So the future of Heartline is going to determine a lot of that. Let's see what else. Let me go to DawgNation.com here for a moment. We'll check in over there, and like I said, we're gonna pop out of here a little on the earlier side today, just because I know all of you got big Father's Day plans. You're ready to enjoy that, and we're certainly going to let you do that. Okay, over here at DawgNation.com, saying hello to some people over there. If we possibly can, which is always a little bit suspect. All right, here at DawgNation.com, reading a couple comments there. And as we said to all the dads out there, hope you're getting ready for a great one. Matt Rukavina writes in to say, not sure if you saw earlier, the daughter of former UGA offensive line coach Mac McWhorter is here in Austin with us. Our girls are dancing together. It's a small world. That is a small world, Matt. And what a cool thing that is. I hope you all have a great time. And I know you were looking forward to going back to Austin, kind of showcasing your Georgia stuff. So hope you and the family have a great one here this weekend. That's awesome. Randy Hall says, how do you pronounce the new kicker's name? So let's see if I can give this one a shot here. I have it as Haran Zurkat. Zurkat, is that what we're going with? Zurkat? Haran Zurkat. I guess that's about the best I'm going to probably do on that right now. No doubt, probably butchering that. SEM Dog says, happy Father's Day to UBA and all the other dogs who've been blessed. We certainly looking forward to a happy one. SEM Dog, I certainly appreciate that. Appreciate that for sure. He said, in my case, a granddaddy. So there you go, SEM Dog. That's awesome stuff. The joy of being a dad, now a grandfather. And boy, what a great thing that is to watch that tradition, the lineage your family passed down. SEM Dog, I know how proud you are of that, and I'm certainly proud to have you with us here today. By the way, our buddy DT pointing out at DawgNation.com, we have fewer trolls than the platforms. I would say we've had some over the years. It seems like we've had less of those lately. That's true. By the way, UGA Marine has Georgia playing LSU in the SEC Championship, which I don't think is an unreasonable pick, both in terms of how it could play out this year and also how many times these teams played. 03, 05, 2011, 2019, and 2022. Is that right? That's still slightly less than Florida's played Alabama, right? They've played the most. Am I not right about this? That Florida and Alabama have played in the SEC title game the most frequently, and then Georgia LSU is the second most frequently. And that's it's got to be the majority of the SEC championships have been one of those two specific matchups, which is kind of weird to think about. Bill Camacho checking out to go run some errands. Appreciate that. Also wishing a happy Father's Day to everybody. We appreciate that. Let's see how our Facebook friends are doing here today, too. Matt Rugavina also on the Facebook side, wishing some happy Father's Day stuff over there. Miriam Corbin checking in. You love that. Barry Watkins says, maybe right for Georgia LSU, the SEC championship, but he's got Georgia Texas for the national title. And y'all, we've been saying this a lot, that Georgia and Texas began last year as strangers, finished having played twice. If they play twice again this year, you are on the way to having some significant history between these two programs that could shape this in something that feels like a rivalry. Not a traditional rivalry, but a rivalry nonetheless. I'd put it kind of in the category of what like Notre Dame, Miami became in the 80s. I'd sort of put it in that kind of category. I'm trying to think if there's something else that sort of feels the same way. Alabama, Clemson had a little bit of a version of that because they played, so frequently they're in the playoffs, back-to-back national title games against each other. Played in the playoff 3 years in a row. There was an Alabama-Clemson kind of thing that sort of felt like a rivalry for a while. Georgia, Texas could be there on their way to sort of being something kind of like that. Peter Wilson, appreciate the kind words. Glad to have you here. Jamie Huff says that Ty Simpson's going to be the Bama quarterback until the UGA game. Then they're going to switch to throw us off. Yeah, I mean, I could sort of see that being true. We've said that before, whether it's different quarterback. And the guy we thought it was going to be was Austin Mack. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe the Russell guy gets it. Or maybe Simpson does hold on to it. But what you've been saying is, and this is a little bit like what Alabama used to be, where they would kind of make a quarterback decision sometime before September ended. And that may be the thing again this year. And obviously that would be the Georgia game, where I think it's entirely possible that the guy who takes the lion's share of the snaps, maybe Simpson, is not the guy who takes the most snaps on that particular day, whether he starts or not. Jamie, I think you could prove to be right about that. Gary Holt talking about the role that Matt Luke, his offensive line coach, has played for the Clemson offensive line. Well, that was a position group that really needed upgrading. And, look, I think they've also upgraded their wide receivers recently. They've held on to some pieces defensively. Speaking of experience at the quarterback spot, Cade Klubnik certainly has that. This sort of feels like one of those sort of not quite as deep as they used to be defensively, but Clemson with a roster at times that from just a sheer number standpoint, a little bit thinner than some of the others that's out there. They would just use kind of generational quarterback talent to kind of make up for some holes in the rest of their roster. I don't know that Klubnik's quite in the same category of a Deshaun Watson or certainly a Trevor Lawrence, but he may be the kind of guy that also gives them a chance to be something a little different than they've been. Justin Ham checking out. Justin, we're glad to have you here today. Happy Father's Day right back to you. Appreciate that. Good stuff. James Davis says we could meet him in the championship game for a three-peat. Look, as he said, mathematically it's possible to play the same SEC team 3 times, and eventually we will see that. We didn't see it last year, at least in terms of the 3 times, but you could see it for somebody here. You really could. Let's see what else. Isha Murphy, appreciate you being here today. Kent Holcomb, good to see you. Ralph Price says the kicker's name is pronounced "it's good," which, listen, that's about all I need for it to be right there. All right, what else? Yes, so let me go back to YouTube one more time, and we'll get ready to wrap it up for this particular Friday. On YouTube one more time. By the way, our buddy Bo Molinari, the resident A&M fan, checks in to say Klubnik, Ewers, and Wegman were 3 of the 5-star quarterbacks out of Texas that same year. So, yeah, a lot was made last year when Klubnik goes back to Texas for the playoff game. Certainly that's the case. Bo, we're glad you're in here today, by the way. Jonathan Aaron says, do you think they're going to figure out the permanent schedule before next season? I don't know. I really don't. So what he's asking is, the last 2 years and 3 of the last 6 years, we have had a temporary schedule in place for the SEC, originally because of the pandemic, last 2 years because of the lack of agreement about whether or not they should go to a 9-game conference schedule. And you want to talk about what I thought was a really, I would say, somewhat surprising about face leading into the spring meetings in Destin. I thought there was enough agreement because ESPN was willing to pay for it that we're going to the 9-game conference schedule, and I thought they might even announce it at the spring meetings. Well, come to find out, I sort of think that the battle lines on this are just as starkly drawn as they've ever been. And those who would like to stay at 8 compared to those who want to go to 9, I think these two camps are just as entrenched as they've ever been. I really do think it's kind of true that we don't have great agreement. Now, do they they'll obviously at some point in time in the early off season, or actually they've also done this in the fall itself. So at some point in time, maybe this fall, they'll announce a 2026 SEC schedule. But at the rate they're currently going, I think there's a chance it's another one-off. And as we've said before, does that mean that you just flip-flop and you play the other SEC teams? Do you play kind of, as Greg Sankey's recently alluded to, a hybrid type situation where Georgia and Auburn and Tennessee and Alabama would have chances at multiple permanent opponents and then rotate the remainder of the games, and the rest of the league would just, those that don't have the same valued secondary rivals, that they would do something a little bit different? It's a real mess. It's a real mess. If they can't get agreement on the 9-game conference schedule, the future of how you handle permanent scheduling becomes a little bit messy, because their whole goal was to see more teams playing more frequently. At least that's what they said. And obviously just the basic math of it would suggest that's a much more difficult thing to do if you're talking about the 8-game slate. Good question. Anything else? Bo Molinari wonders if Georgia will finally go to College Station in 2026. Obviously, never having been there, even though A&M's now been in the league since 2012. Bo, I've jokingly said before that I almost hope that Georgia just never does, just sort of keep the trivia alive. But you got to imagine that if they do put their thumb on the scale for the schedule, sending Georgia to Texas A&M would be one of the things they would perhaps try to influence. Foster Moss says, is the 2007 Florida win the greatest win against Florida of all time? That's a good question. I would say that my memories of the 2017 game, which is a strange thing, but 2017 is what started the run of dominance minus 2020 that we still enjoy today. That was the day in which the rivalry changed. Georgia blew them out, McElwain got fired, and Florida's been reeling ever since then. The 07 game was thrilling and obviously featured the celebration, things like that. But in terms of how it impacted the rivalry in future years, it became a little bit of a one-off because, honestly, Florida beat Georgia pretty bad in 08 and 09 and then still beat them in 2010 too. So that's one of those things that I don't quite know had the staying power. But when you blew them out in 2017, boy, you stuck it to them, and you've been sticking it to them for the most part ever since. So I probably have my happiest memories are probably of that, because I do thoroughly enjoy the dominance that Georgia has had in this series. I also thoroughly enjoy all of you being with us here each and every day, and hope you're getting ready for a great weekend, which, as we've been saying, does include Father's Day. So enjoy that, and don't let a plumbing emergency ruin your Father's Day weekend. If you have a water heater, for instance, that goes out, well, our friends at RS Andrews may be able to replace that water heater for you here the same day. Call them. They'll be there today to get it done. After all, the RS stands for rapid service. So you can find them online, rsandrews.com, rsandrews.com. Also, get your air conditioning unit tuned up. Stay comfortable and cool here this summer because, boy, hot weather is sort of officially here right now. So they got you covered on that as well. So trust RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Enjoy the weekend. We're back Monday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then.